People often say that education is a ticket to success, but what happens when that ticket is stripped away from the students that need it the most? What happens when that ticket doesn't even exist? I'm currently a senior in the Houston Independent School District, the largest school district within the state of Texas, home to 214,175 students. I am one of 162,623 students considered to be economically disadvantaged.
There's going to be some hyperlinks under this video. I want you to look up what economically disadvantaged means. I know you understand it means the family makes less money, but I want the exact definition that the states go by, New York State and such. I'm going to hyperlink some reading, and you're going to come up with the definition.
I was once one of the 602,393 students that are English language learners. My school district should receive $6,457 per student, but we only receive $5,843 per student. That's a $614 gap per student, in case you couldn't do the math. Now, I know that you may be wondering why this gap is so huge and why it even exists in the first place. And I'm here to tell you that the problem lies within the state funding formula. Texas allocates the funds given to school districts through a process known as average daily attendance, or ADA.
New York State uses a very similar system.
ADA is the total number of students who are in attendance each day of the school year for the entire school year, divided by the number of instructional days in the school year, which is typically 180 days. The goal here is to promote equity among Texas's biggest and smallest school districts, but the exact opposite occurs. As far-fetched as it may sound, a problem exists when it comes to funding public schools, especially when considering high-need districts with a high percentage of economically disadvantaged students and English language learners. And this is no secret for researchers within the state. According to the University of Texas at El Paso, there is 5.5% less funding for higher poverty areas in the state. To put this into perspective, let's compare two school districts, one that is high need and one that is low need. These two school districts will be modeled after two real-world examples from Texas. All economically disadvantaged and English language learner percentages from this model will be true to the real-world districts, and both district enrollment numbers will be fixed to be 10,000 students. In addition, the funding weights given to economically disadvantaged students and English language learners will be true to the weights given by the Texas Education Agency when allocating school funds to districts. In this example, the low-need district has a 9,900 average daily attendance, nearly perfect, while the high-need district has a 9,200 average daily attendance.
Now, you might need to rewatch the segment from 144 of the video to 332. My question to you is, what does student attendance have to do with student funding? So let's go over the graph for a second. If you remember, they set enrollment to 10,000 per group, whether it's high-need district or low-need district. Now look at the difference here. Low-need district, 9,900 out of 10,000 enrolled and present each day. And high-need district, 9,200 out of 10,000 present each day. You might have to rewatch that segment and fight with this question a little bit. If you solved it, let's go on with the video.
Once we calculate the weighted pupils using the percentages of economically disadvantaged students and English language learners, weighted pupils should be 10,959 instead of 11,070 when taking into account average daily attendance in the low-need district. In the high-need district, however, the weighted pupils is reduced to 11,803 when taking into account average daily attendance, compared to the 12,830 students.
What does she mean by weighted pupils? So on this chart, 80% of the district, the high-need district, is economically disadvantaged, and they put a weight of 0.30. So it's almost like adding 0.3 of an extra student. And English language learners, 43% of this district is English language learners. So added an extra weight, it's like 1/10 of a student. So if you compare the low need district with the high need district, like there's big differences. So she's essentially saying that even though both districts started out with 10,000 in this equation, that because there is extra need, whether it be through economically disadvantaged or English language learners, the weight of this district is really 12,830 because there's an extra need. So the question I'm asking you is, what does Lizeth Ramirez mean by weighted pupils? Do you consider the concept to be fair? Back to the video.
When calculating the total cost per student, it must be noted that there is a $5,141 basic allotment per student in Texas. This means that at least $5,141 is given to school districts per student.
The next question is, what does per pupil mean? Now, this is going to be an important concept because all states use per pupil, and it's basically the amount of money a district spends on students in a given year and dividing it by the number of students in that district. You can write that, that's absolutely fine. Is per pupil equal in all states across the nation or all counties within a given state? Oh, heck no. Now we're starting to get to the root of what Jonathan Kozel was saying. But anyway, let's get on with this video.
Now, in order to calculate the target funding, we must use the weighted pupils calculated above and multiply it by the basic allotment, $5,041. Once we take ADA into account, the allotment per student is $5,634 compared to $5,691 for the low need district and $6,067 per student compared to $6,595 for the high need district. That's a $57 and $528 gap per student, respectively. This means that the low need district loses $57 per student due to average daily attendance, while the high need district loses $528 per student. That's a $471 difference between the two districts.
But how does a given school district get funded?
A new problem arises when we consider the money necessary to be gathered for funding the total cost per student. The money gathered for the total cost per student is received from both a local share and a state share.
I'm going to hyperlink to a table that will simplify this. Basically, you have federal aid, which is the national government, state aid, and local, which largely comes from property taxes.
In other words, target funding is met through contributions from both state aid and local aid. Historically, low-need districts receive most of the total cost per student from local share, while high-need districts receive most from state share. And while we know that a gap exists between both low-need and high-need districts for target funding, this is especially important when considering state share. High-need districts depend primarily on state share, so the state aid loss to ADA is especially devastating because high-need districts cannot afford to have a higher local share in order to finance the total cost per student. Lower-need districts are privy to higher fundable properties and can therefore afford these state aid reductions. Higher-need districts, however, cannot do the same and are therefore met with more consequences when it comes to state aid reductions. This means only one thing. ADA hurts the students that need the funds the most. The use of ADA in our state funding can be described using two words: illogical and reckless. When it comes to educating children, school districts need to have all the resources that can possibly be available for every child enrolled at their district. School districts are responsible for giving these resources to children, so consider this. At any given day, 100% of a student body will be present at a school. So on any given day, there needs to be resources like books, computers, materials, and other equipment for 100% of enrolled children. Why then does it make sense to only have 92% of resources available to 100% of students. The message is clear. Texas should not utilize a method that only accounts for 92% of enrolled children. You may be asking yourself on the relevance of this topic, and trust me, I once thought the same. But this also needs to be said. 7 states outside of Texas also use some form of ADA funding. These states include California, Idaho, Kentucky, Mississippi, Missouri, New Jersey, and Illinois.
New York State uses it's called a beds count. There's a beds day, and on a given day, there's a snapshot that is taken. And yes, it can be adjusted, but for the most part, budgets are set for that one day.
And though these numbers may seem small, these states account for roughly 1/3 of enrollment at the national scale. 1/3 of all students attend these school districts. This means that 1/3 of all children in the United States see some form of reduced funding due to average daily attendance. This means that 1/3 of children are met with limitations to their education. It is often said that education is a ticket to success. And if that is truly the case, then why should our state government strip that ticket away from those who need it the most? Education matters. And educating those that are economically disadvantaged and English language learners is imperative to better our society and provide that ticket to success. But it is evident that school funding, more specifically funding as it pertains to average daily attendance, creates an overwhelming disadvantage for school districts that are economically disadvantaged. Action, therefore, must be taken in order to eliminate this process as a whole for the betterment of the educational system in Texas and those 7 states. If a 17-year-old student can realize the fallacies within state funding, why can't our state politicians do the same? This isn't a debate that must be fought between Democrats and Republicans. This is a battle that must be ended through any means necessary. The numbers behind me don't just represent the gap in funding. It represents the loss of resources to the students that need it the most. It represents the limits on educating the most vulnerable students. We must do better for our children. There are no ifs or buts to this statement. Realizing this now, we need to change the mindset on school funding. School funding for 1/3 of the country is not efficient. It places school districts with the highest need at a complete disadvantage. More importantly, it places students that are already at risk at a higher risk. One of the many actions that we are privy to is holding our politicians accountable. If education is as important as we make it out to be, then that same attitude must be held when it comes to actualizing policies for education within our states. Hold politicians accountable and change the way we fund school districts. Change doesn't have to begin at a large national scale. Change begins individually through a change in perspective. Soon, that perspective mounts to action taken locally within your own school district. Hold your local school representatives accountable by demanding a new funding formula that eliminates average daily attendance. Average daily attendance funding is inequitable. We must spark change in order to change funding for the students that need it the most. Thank you.
Next, we're going to collect some data and use Microsoft Excel.